Title: The 1.2 billion bottle opener disaster. How a mistake forced a super tall to change shape mid-construction. Music. Urgent: Drumfin Cable News beat visual. Fast B-roll of Shanghai's Pudong skyline at night, neon reflecting off the Huangpu River, focusing on the gigantic geometric crown of the Shanghai World Financial. Narrator: This is the skyline that wasn't supposed to look like this. Right now, standing 492 meters over the Pudong district in Shanghai, mainland China, is a 101-story titan of steel and glass. Locally, they call it the bottle opener. It is a structural masterpiece that, for a brief moment in engineering history, held the title for the highest occupied floor on Earth, but look closely at the massive trapezoidal hole cut directly through its summit. Sound effect. Swoosh, scratch. That hole was never supposed to be a trapezoid. It was supposed to be a perfect, seamless circle. A magnificent 46-meter void designed to honor traditional aesthetics and alleviate thousands of tons of wind load pressure, threatening to snap the tower in half during a typhoon. Instead, it became an unprecedented $1.2 billion engineering crisis that triggered an international uproar, halted construction instantly, and forced an entire team of world-class architects and structural engineers to completely rewrite the blueprint of a super-tall skyscraper while it was already climbing into the clouds. The problem wasn't a structural failure of the concrete. It wasn't a sudden bankruptcy of the developer, Shanghai Tower Investment Holdings. The problem was a symbol, a massive, circular aperture that millions of local citizens looked up at and saw not a triumph of modern engineering, but a glaring, historical provocation planted permanently into the sky over their own city. Visual. Dramatic. Zoom in on the crown opening. How does a geometric void in a mega project trigger a massive public intervention, forcing a multi-million-dollar structural redesign mid-build? To understand how a routine structural wind vent turned into a catastrophic design rewrite, you have to rewind to a Shanghai that no longer exists. Visual. Historical archive footage. Shanghai. Early mud flats, low-rise warehouses, hectic construction sites go back to the early 1990s. While global markets were fluctuating, mainland China was accelerating into the largest economic and urban expansion the world had ever witnessed. Millions of people were moving into industrial and financial hubs. Shanghai was being aggressively transformed into a financial capital to rival New York and London. Directly across the river from the historic Bund lay Pudong, a low-lying landscape of marshland, rice paddies, and old wharf warehouses. The Municipal Construction Commission laid out a staggering mandate: transform this mud into a dense forest of over 80 advanced commercial high-rises almost overnight. And at the absolute center of this gold rush would stand 3 super-tall giants to define the skyline for the next century. Visual. Graphic animation showing the 3 plots in Pudong. The first plot was already claimed by the Jinmao Tower, a striking supertall modeled on the tiered geometries of a traditional Chinese pagoda. To crown the second plot, the developer commissioned a radical new vision from lead architect Wang Lin. Wang wanted something entirely unique, moving away from literal historicism toward pure structural expression. He went back to first principles. What does a super-tall skyscraper actually do? It bridges the gap between the ground and the sky. Wang reached for 2 of the oldest structural and philosophical concepts in regional architecture: the square, representing the foundational earth, and the circle, representing the endless heavens. He stacked them. The building would rise as a square prism, its walls gently tapering as it climbed, culminating in a giant circular void cut clean through the top floors. It was brilliant. It was elegant. And on paper, it solved the ultimate enemy of any super-tall building: wind tunnel dynamics. But when the initial blueprints were submitted to a senior review board of the local housing bureau and structural professors in 1993, a solitary engineer stood up, looked at the circular crown, and left a chilling warning. She noted that while the mathematics were sound, the design was deeply problematic for reasons no equation can fix. She refused to elaborate, and the file was stamped approved. Construction workers poured the first concrete foundations in 1995. The project was full steam ahead. Sound effect, heavy thud, music drops to an anxious, detuned drone. Then, the first disaster struck. Not from the sky, but from the banks. In 1997, the Asian financial crisis ripped through regional economies. Capital for high-stakes megaprojects evaporated overnight. The cash flow dried up completely, and the site fell dead silent. For nearly half a decade, the massive foundation grid sat as a flooded, hollow scar in the Pudong mud, a $100 million monument to an economic boom that had suddenly run out of time by the time the municipal developers restructured the financing and prepared to pump hundreds of millions of dollars back into the site in the early 2000s. The entire world of super-tall engineering had radically changed. The global height race had migrated permanently to major Asian hubs, with structures like the Petronas Towers taking the crowns and new towers climbing higher every month. The developers looked at their half-built foundations and made a daring high-stakes gamble. If this building was going to rise into this ultra-competitive new era, it couldn't just stick to its original plan. It had to go higher. They ordered the engineering team to expand the scope from a 460-meter, 94-floor layout to a staggering 492 meters across 101 stories. There was just one terrifying structural catch. The concrete piles and heavy foundational friction pads were already permanently cast deep into the subterranean soil. They had been precisely calculated and engineered to support the weight of a significantly shorter, lighter tower. Now, the team was demanding more floors, more steel, more glass, and more wind load on a foundation that was never designed to carry it. Visual. Text graphic. Part 1 ends. Awaiting next part. If you want to see exactly how engineers solved this foundation crisis, only to run face first into a massive public controversy that forced them to tear the top of the building apart, hit subscribe and drop your thoughts below. Sound effect, deep cello pulse. Tonal shift to mechanical chronology visual. Tech animation showing the subterranean piles under Pudong, the soil strata, and the massive weight of the added floors pressing down in glowing red indicators narrator. The math was entirely broken. You cannot simply add 7 stories of heavy structural steel, massive concrete floors, and thousands of square meters of thick glass curtain wall to a skyscraper when its boots are already stuck in the mud. Underneath the Pudong site lay a brutal geological reality, soft, watery river delta silt. The entire weight of the tower rested on concrete friction piles, driven deep into this shifting soil. If the weight of the newly expanded 101-story skyscraper exceeded the maximum load capacity of those existing piles, the building would suffer from severe differential settlement. In plain engineering terms, the tower would unevenly sink, tilt, or develop catastrophic structural fractures through its core before it was even topped out. To solve what looked like an insurmountable engineering bottleneck, the developer brought in chief structural analyst Li Jun, a legendary figure who had masterminded major complex high-rise skeletons across mainland China. Li looked at the constraints and realized they couldn't touch the ground. If they couldn't strengthen the foundation, they had to lighten the sky visual. Speed up 3D schematics, showing the angle skeleton of the tower changed. From heavy concrete to a diagonal truss, Mesh Li's team launched into an aggressive, month-long engineering recalculation. The mandate was brutal in its simplicity: increase the height by 32 meters, add 7 full floors, expand the total internal square footage, but somehow make the final structure weigh 10% less than the original. Shorter design. His solution completely rewrote how mega projects in China handled structural load. He systematically stripped away the traditional, thick concrete perimeter walls that defined early super-tall designs. In their place, he wrapped the entire exterior of the tower in an advanced diagonal braced frame system, reinforced by massive outrigger trusses hooked directly into a thinned-out central concrete core. This structural grid acted like an external exoskeleton. Instead of relying solely on raw mass to resist gravity and wind forces, the diagonal steel members distributed the immense loads efficiently down the outer skin of the building. Visual. Archival photos or footage of cranes hoisting massive heavy outrigger trusses into place at extremities. The engineering chronology of this redesign is a masterclass in modern structural optimization. Weight reduction. The steel exoskeleton shed roughly 10,000 tons of unnecessary weight from the perimeter, successfully keeping the total downward force within the safety margins of the original foundation piles. Tutorial efficiency. By reducing the thickness of the inner core walls, the team saved thousands of cubic meters of heavy concrete, which also drastically accelerated the pouring schedule. Space optimization. Stripping columns away from the exterior windows opened up completely unobstructed interior floor plates, creating premium office spaces with sweeping views across the Huangpu River. With the foundation crisis solved by brilliant engineering, the tower began to race upward in a rapid build cycle. Floor after floor was poured, and the core climbed into the low-hanging Shanghai clouds. By 2004, construction crews were reaching the upper tiers, preparing to assemble the massive structural steel framing for the building's defining feature, the giant 46-meter circular wind tunnel aperture. Sound effect. Drum impact, alarm sound hinting. At crunch time, the circle was engineered to perform a critical physical function. At nearly 500 meters in the air, wind speeds can easily exceed 200 kilometers per hour during typhoon season. A solid, flat-faced tower acts like a giant sail, absorbing millions of pounds of lateral force that push the structure sideways, putting immense bending stress on the base. By cutting a massive circle through the top, the engineers created a high-velocity vent. The wind would pass straight through the crown instead of slamming into it, reducing structural sway by up to 40% and preventing the skyscraper from fatiguing its steel joints over time. Everything was going exactly according to the Construction Commission's tight timeline. Steel columns were being bolted into place at the 90th floor. The circular framework was beginning to take shape against the sky. Then the tower hit a wall that no structural engineer could calculate around. Visual images of early 2000s computer screens, Chinese forums, and headlines print in local newspapers. It began with a single editorial column in a prominent local financial newspaper. The writer looked up at the rising skeleton of the skyscraper, looked at the circular void taking shape at the summit, and published a scathing critique that lit a fuse through the public consciousness. The article pointed out a stark, highly charged visual parallel. The tower was being heavily funded by an elite consortium of high-profile private equity developers, but the primary architectural concept featured a giant, stark circle sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the skyline. To millions of local citizens, that massive circle cut into the sky looked exactly like the rising sun motif from a foreign military banner, a symbol tied directly to the devastating historical occupation of the city during the mid-20th century. Visual. Slow drifting shot over the recently constructed concrete floors, and the city spread out blurry. In a city like Shanghai, historical memory is not abstract, it is etched into the very geography of the waterfront. The internet was just beginning to explode across mainland China, and early web forums became an immediate amplifier for public outrage. Within weeks, the narrative shifted from celebrating a modern architectural triumph to viewing the skyscraper as a permanent, structural provocation planted over the commercial heart of the country. The municipal authorities and the mayor's office were inundated with letters and petitions. The anger spread faster than any corporate public relations team could contain. A design that architect Wang Lin had intended as a beautiful poetic homage to ancient regional cosmology, the circle of the heavens meeting the square of the earth, had been completely reinterpreted by the public as a symbol of national historical insensitivity. Sound effect. Rumble of a heavy crane stopping engine. The local housing bureau issued an immediate, tense directive to the developers: halt construction on the upper canopy. The design had to be reevaluated. The architects were called into an emergency, closed-door session with the Municipal Construction Commission. Wang Lin found himself facing a crisis that no advanced structural software or engineering degree could prepare him for. He had to completely redesign the wind-load dynamics and the architectural crown of one of the world's tallest buildings mid-construction. Not because a beam had cracked, and not because the budget had failed, but because a geometric shape held too much weight for a city to bear. Visual. Text graphic. Part 2 ends. Awaiting next part. If you want to see the brilliant accidental business solution that saved the skyscraper from a permanent shutdown, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments. Should engineering always adapt to public meaning? Stay tuned for part 3. Sound effect, deep, resonant gong that transition into a low, driving electronic bass line. Visual map animation tracing across mainland China. Lighting up rapidly, growing industrial hubs like Shenzhen, Chongqing, Guangzhou, and Tianjin. Before returning to the Shanghai skyline narrator, the crisis at the summit of the 492-meter tower was unprecedented, but it wasn't happening in a vacuum. To truly understand the pressure facing the engineers in Shanghai, you have to look at the broader landscape of mega-project development across mainland China during this explosive era, an era defined by rapid build cycles, unforgiving schedules, and structural risks where the margin for error was exactly zero. When a super-tall project of this scale halts mid-construction, it sends a financial shockwave through the entire regional industry. In the high-stakes world of commercial high-rises, every single day a tower stands dormant costs, hundreds of thousands of dollars in idling cranes, specialized labor contracts, and mounting interest on massive capital loans. But across China, developers were learning a brutal lesson. The engineering of a skyscraper is often the easy part. Managing the immense public, environmental, and geological forces around it is where projects either survive or face total ruin. Visual, role of comptation work, deep excavations, and compacted soil in urban areas. Consider what was happening south in Shenzhen's commercial center around the same time. Engineers were battling severe soil settlement and lateral displacement deep excavation zones right next to major subway lines. One wrong calculation in structural shoring or a minor shift in subterranean water tables, and an entire high-rise foundation grid could slide, causing nearby streets to crack open and forcing immediate multi-million-dollar emergency structural interventions. Look at the northern hub of Tianjin, where an ambitious megablock development ran directly into severe financial and structural bottlenecks, leaving a soaring concrete skeleton frozen permanently against the sky. A stark warning of what happens when a project loses its momentum. Or look farther west to Chongqing, where building supertalls on sheer mountainous topography meant managing complex hillside rock stress and massive retaining structures before the first steel column could even be bolted down in every major city. From the riverfront towers of Wuhan to the dense mixed-use complexes of Guangzhou, skyscrapers were being pushed higher and faster than ever before. But with that speed came an absolute vulnerability to any sudden layout change. Visual, graphic 3D, render arching wide lines slamming into a skyscraper with a solid crown versus one with a hollow crown. The team in Shanghai was caught in the worst possible scenario. They couldn't just leave the tower unfinished as a blunt, flat-roofed block. The structural design demanded a large opening at the top to handle the violent typhoons that regularly sweep in from the East China Sea. If they completely sealed the upper canopy to avoid the controversial circle, the building's wind resistance profile would change instantly. Without a high-velocity vent, the giant tower would absorb the full, unyielding force of lateral wind loads. The immense bending moment at the base would skyrocket, exceeding the safety parameters calculated for those thinned-out concrete core walls and optimized exterior outrigger trusses. Sealing the hole meant the entire building would become structurally unviable, threatening the integrity of the foundation piles deep in the mud. The engineers didn't just need a cosmetic fix. They needed a brand new geometric formula that would allow the wind to pass through smoothly while entirely stripping away the controversial visual parallel, slow motion, engineering, rendering showing the original circle, morphing, step by step into a trapezoidal opening. Architect Wang Lin and lead structural analyst Li Jun locked themselves in a design war room with a team from the local housing bureau and aerodynamic specialists. They began testing alternative configurations inside virtual wind tunnels. First, Wang tried to compromise. He suggested keeping the 46-meter circle, but adding a massive structural steel pedestrian bridge across the bottom arc of the opening. The goal was to visually split the circle, breaking the perfect round shape so it could no longer be interpreted as a rising sun emblem. But when the updated sketches were leaked to early internet forums and local news columns, the public response remained entirely cold. The momentum of the controversy was simply too great. The circle had to be erased completely. The team then looked at a sharp, square opening. But a perfect square presented major structural issues at the corners. High-velocity winds pushing through a sharp, right-angled aperture create severe aerodynamic turbulence and localized vortex shedding, miniature air cyclones that can cause the upper floors of a tower to vibrate violently, inducing severe structural fatigue on the steel joints. Furthermore, a square didn't match the elegant, tapering profile of the building's exterior walls, which gently leaned inward as they approached the sky. Sound effect: reverberating system chime. That is when the engineering team hit upon a brilliant alternative geometry. They stretched the top and bottom lines, angled the side supports, and arrived at a precise, flat-bottomed trapezoidal aperture. The trapezoid was a masterstroke of functional adaptation. Because its outer columns angled inward at the exact same degree as the building's tapering facade, it integrated seamlessly into the structural skeleton Li Jun had designed. When they ran the aerodynamic simulations, the results were astonishing. The trapezoidal slot didn't just match the wind reduction performance of the original circle. It actually performed better in specific high-altitude wind directions, letting massive air currents slice through the crown with clean, laminar flow and minimal turbulence. Visual. Text graphic. Part 3 ends. Awaiting next part. But changing the shape of a super tall skyscraper's crown mid-air isn't as simple as swapping a 3D model on a computer screen. Up at the 90th floor, real workers were standing on scaffolding, waiting for blueprints, while the developer faced a massive logistical nightmare. Hit subscribe, drop a comment on whether you think the trapezoid looks better than the circle, and get ready for part 4. Sound effect: induction roar. Heavy industrial ambience. Visual dramatic look-down shot from a crane jib over 400 meters in the air, showing scaffolding clinging to the edge of the tower with urban Shanghai spread out far below. Narrator, up at 450 meters in the air. There is no room for abstraction. For the construction crews on the upper tiers of the Pudong Tower, the international controversy and the boardroom negotiations weren't a matter of cultural symbolism. They were an immediate, high-stakes logistical nightmare. Imagine standing on a narrow steel staging platform, buffeted by freezing high-altitude winds, surrounded by thousands of tons of prefabricated structural columns, only to receive an emergency order from the Municipal Construction Commission: stop everything, clear the decks, and prepare to tear open the blueprint. When the structural design was officially converted from a 46-meter circle to a flat-bottomed trapezoid in 2005, the building was already climbing past its 90th floor. Heavy steel columns, designed for a curved, circular archway, were already manufactured, paid for, and waiting in holding yards along the Huangpu River. Changing the geometry mid-construction meant halting an incredibly complex supply chain that relied on precision timing, visual, graphic animation of the re-engineering zone from floor 90 to floor 101, showing reinforced box girders tying the trapezoid together. Every single structural element above the 90th floor had to be completely recalculated and refabricated. Senior Construction Superintendent Zhang Wei was tasked with executing this frantic pivot. Zhang faced a massive engineering puzzle. A circular opening distributes forces smoothly along a continuous radial curve. A trapezoid, however, introduces sharp, defined corners where the horizontal crossbeams meet the sloping side columns. In structural engineering, corners are dangerous. They create massive points of stress concentration. When violent typhoon winds slam into the broad face of the tower, the immense lateral forces try to twist and tear the opening at those exact joints. To prevent the new trapezoidal aperture from cracking under the strain, Zhang's teams had to install massive, multi-ton structural steel box girders at the base and the upper header of the opening. They were dense, heavily reinforced blocks of high-strength structural steel that required specialized, continuous multi-pass welding sequences. Because the workspace was suspended hundreds of meters in the air, crews had to work inside temporary windshields, to prevent the protective shielding gases from blowing away during the delicate welding process. One flawed weld line could compromise the entire upper canopy of the tower. Visual, roll of glowing, welder, sparks at night, seen against the Blackshang skyline, with neon lights reflecting on the rivers, while Zhangwei fought the structural battle in the sky. The economic reality of the redesign was hitting the developer's ledger. The direct cost of scrapping the prefabricated circular components, engineering the new trapezoidal box frames, and delaying the specialized crane operators added tens of millions of dollars to the final budget. But as the teams began to lay out the new interior floor plates around the trapezoidal void, they stumbled into a massive accidental financial victory. Under the original design, the circular opening created highly irregular, curving interior walls on the surrounding floors. These curved spaces were an architectural nightmare to utilize, resulting in awkward, wasted square footage in what was supposed to be the ultra-premium hotel zone of the tower. The trapezoid changed everything. Because it featured straight, sloping walls and a completely flat base, it opened up clean, highly efficient structural lines. The engineers realized they could now run straight, uninterrupted concrete floors directly up to the edge of the flat bottom slot. This geometric shift created a massive bonus of usable interior real estate. The developers immediately capitalized on this, using the newly cleared space to expand the layout for a sprawling, ultra-luxury sky hotel sitting between the 79th and 93rd floors. The flat base of the trapezoid also allowed the architects to design a breathtaking, multi-level indoor observation deck that stretched directly across the lower lip of the aperture, giving visitors a dizzying, vertical look down through glass floor panels straight onto the streets of Pudong below. Visual, text graphic on screen. The compulted bottle opener, crown shining in the sunlight, contrasting the straight geometric lines of the trapezoid with the squarish, Jin Mao Tower next. Dora crisis that had threatened to turn the skyscraper into a permanent, unfinished financial disaster had been transformed by sheer engineering pragmatism into a highly profitable design asset. The tower finally topped out at its full 492 meters, its unique angular crown slicing cleanly into the clouds. The public, watching the final glass curtain walls wrap around the massive trapezoidal slot, quickly found a new, entirely affectionate name for the building. The controversial symbol was gone, replaced by the iconic bottle opener silhouette that defined a new era of urban design. But the lessons learned on the Pudong site weren't unique. The intense intersection of engineering, public perception, and structural was playing out in mega projects all across mainland China. Visual, fast roll montage of deep urban high-rise. Construction sites in various industrial hubs down in the high-density tech sectors of Shenzhen. Structural teams were constantly modifying skyscraper designs midstream to accommodate strict new municipal fire safety codes and complex subterranean transit links. In the soaring commercial sectors of Guangzhou, towers facing unexpected high-altitude wind currents had to implement specialized tuned mass dampers, giant, heavy steel pendulums suspended inside the upper floors, to counteract building sway and ensure occupant comfort, even in inland megacities like Chengdu and Wuhan, where vast commercial blocks were rising over historical neighborhoods. Architects were learning that every line drawn on a blueprint carries immense weight. You cannot build a monument that reshapes a city's horizon without answering to the community that lives in its shadow. The structural engineers in Shanghai had successfully navigated a financial freeze, an extreme foundation weight crisis, and a massive national design controversy. They had proven that steel and concrete can be bent, recalculated, and adapted to overcome almost any physical or social constraint. But as the final cranes were dismantled and the tower prepared for its grand opening in 2008, a brand new challenge emerged on the horizon. One that would push the building into a whole new battle for structural relevance. Visual. Text graphic. Part 4 ends. Awaiting next part. To see how this legendary skyscraper came within a fraction of a world height record, only to make a shocking, deliberate choice to let it go, hit subscribe and join us for the final chapter in Part 5. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Is the bottle opener shape the most iconic crown in the world? Sound effect, epic, sweeping orchestral synth, resolution and visual-wide, majestic drone shot of the Pudong skyline at sunset, tracing the majestic shapes of the Jinmao Tower, the Shanghai World Financial Center, and the massive Shanghai Tower narrator. When the Shanghai World Financial Center finally opened its doors in August 2008, it stood as an absolute triumph of survival. It had withstood a devastating regional financial crash that froze its foundations for years, a critical weight crisis that threatened to cap its height, and an intense national controversy that forced it to completely rewrite its geometric shape mid-air. But as the final glass panels were polished, the tower found itself standing on the edge of an ultimate milestone. It had officially secured the title for the highest occupied floor on Earth at 474 meters, and the highest flat roof line at 492 meters. By every measure of functional, usable human space, it had a legitimate claim to being the tallest building in the world. Yet, it could not claim the absolute, undisputed height record. And the reason why reveals the final fascinating choice made by the developers. Visual, graphic, comparing the tower side by side with Taipei 101, showing the hollow crown vs the tall architectural spear, the reigning champion at the time, Taipei 101, surpassed Shanghai's roofline by a mere few meters. But it accomplished this entirely by using a massive, decorative architectural spire. Architect Wang Lin later revealed that his structural team could have easily added a localized spire configuration or extended the top decorative fins of the trapezoid to seize the outright world height title. But the developer flatly refused. They didn't want a fragile needle reaching for an arbitrary number. They wanted a bold, broad-shouldered monument, a permanent architectural statement where every single meter served a clear structural and commercial purpose. They let the absolute title go on purpose, prioritizing clean, uncompromised structural elegance over a temporary record. And that choice proved to be entirely prophetic. Just 2 short years later, a towering mega-project in Dubai opened its doors, pushing the world height record so incredibly far out of reach that the global race for the absolute tallest title completely lost its meaning. Instead of chasing a fleeting numbers game, the bottle opener secured something far more permanent, an iconic, irreplaceable status in the architectural identity of mainland China. Visual. Panoramic revolving shot shown the famous 3-tower triad in Pudong standing shoulder to shoulder. Today, it no longer stands alone. It forms one part of the most famous architectural triad on the planet. It stands shoulder to shoulder with the pagoda-inspired Jinmao Tower and the soaring, twisted 632-meter form of the Shanghai Tower. This marks the first time in engineering history that 3 distinct super-tall skyscrapers were ever constructed directly adjacent to one another in a single urban core. Look at them shining against the night sky, and you realize a deeper, quieter truth about the built environment. A skyscraper is never just a cold calculation of structural steel, heavy glass curtain walls, and concrete core foundations. When a building climbs that high into the heavens, it transitions from a commercial real estate project into a powerful public symbol, whether its architect ever intended it to or not, and the millions of citizens who live, work, and walk beneath its shadow every single day get an absolute vote, sometimes the final, deciding vote, on what that symbol is allowed to say the world. Visual. Fast action montage riveting the core visuals of the blueprint rewrites, the shifting geometries, and the compulted crown. Consider the immense burdens this 492-meter giant had to carry before it could ever touch the clouds. An economic freeze that turned its foundation grid into a flooded pit in the mud, a structural engineering crisis where a heavier, taller building had to be thinned out to save its existing friction piles, an aerodynamic requirement for a massive wind tunnel opening that accidentally triggered an international design emergency. A frantic, high-altitude structural rewrite that erased a perfect circle and left a magnificent trapezoid in its place. The engineers set out with a poetic vision to connect the square of the Earth to the circle of the heavens. What they discovered instead is that you can pour every advanced mathematical formula, every welding shield, and every wind tunnel dynamic into a mega project, and still learn that the heaviest load a building must support is its meaning. Somewhere right now, In an urban planning office in Shenzhen, Chongqing, or Guangzhou, another structural designer is sketching a bold new shape into a city's horizon, entirely certain they know exactly what it says. But the question that halted this Shanghai super tall halfway to the sky is the exact same question hiding inside every monument ever built. Who actually gets to decide what a building means? The person who designs it, the developer who pays for it, or the millions of people who have to look up at it every single day? Visual, the camera slowly drifts up through the trapezoidal gap, looking into the deep blue sky as the music crescendos to a final hit sound effect, industrial drum outro. Fade to black. If you appreciate the deep engineering context, the structural breakdowns, and the real human stories that shape the world's most expensive mega projects, hit subscribe, smash the like button, and turn on notifications. Every week, we dig into the verified architectural records where the engineering was just the beginning and the human forces around it changed history. Drop your final thoughts in the comments below, and we will see you in the next investigation.